Hello everyone, welcome to the first chapter of American Government. In this chapter we go over what we should know about American government. This chapter just takes a brief overview about our system of American government, but also compares other types of democracy that you might find. Over the course of this chapter there are 3 questions that you'll need to be able to answer. 1. 2 definitions of democracy. 2. Why is democracy itself not enough to protect the freedoms of individuals? And then 3, what's the difference between a parliamentarian system and a presidential system? We have a presidential system. Many countries in Europe have a parliamentary system. This chapter, for the most part, will take a look at the British parliamentary system. First question you have to ask yourself is, why even have a government? For a couple of reasons, government is important. One, there are a lot of things that people by themselves cannot do, particularly because people tend to disagree about basic ideas and concepts about what is right and what is wrong or how something should operate. So from a political side, a government is good because it helps people to manage conflict over who's in charge. We manage this conflict through an election process. You also need to have a government to make decisions for the larger group of people. If we didn't have a government, every individual would be making decisions for their best interest, which could impart harm on another individual, or may not be even the best decision to be made for his or her entire family. So our government is there, first of all, to decide who's in charge, but also to make decisions for everyone involved in this country. There are many different types of democracy, many different types of means of democracy or definitions of democracy. Democracy simply is government by the people. We don't have a king or a queen or a dictator or an oligarchy which is ruled by 2 or 3 people, or an anarchy where you have no one in charge. We have democracy, which means the government is by the people. The famous line, of course, is government for the people, of the people, and by the people. Now, there are a couple of different types of democracy. The first is a direct democracy, and that is a democracy in which citizens make government decisions by themselves. They do not elect leaders per se. They make all decisions through the voting process. Now, this is the type of democracy you would find in ancient Greece. Today, if you have a town hall meeting where people are making a decision, or even maybe you're making a decision as a class in high school or even in college, that's a direct democracy where everybody has a vote and has a say in the matter. A representative democracy is when policy is made by officials elected by the people. We elect people to make decisions for us, and therefore they make policy. In a republic, then power is vested in elected representatives. Now, in a representative democracy, in a republic, you may say, that's kind of the same thing. But if you would, open your textbook, and if you'll turn to page 3, it talks about the means of different types of democracy. So it talks about direct democracy, and if you flip over to page, on page 3 there, it talks about democracy and a direct democracy. So the question again is, what is the difference between a representative democracy and a republic? Well, in a representative democracy, it's made by officials elected by the people, as I said before. A republic is where you elect people to make policy for you. Now, really they're the same thing, but our framers called our country a republic. And so when someone asks you what type of government we had, you can say, more correctly, we are a republic. I guess more correctly is not even a word. So the best answer is republic, more so than saying we are democracy. This is an example of a republic, people getting in line for the voting process. Now, these individuals are probably not making all the decisions. They're probably going in to make a decision on who should be elected, or they may be going in to vote on a state or local matter. And so again, this is a form of democracy, government by the people. And so when you talk about democracy, there are a couple of things you also need to consider. One is, it is a legitimate government, and again, we've elected it. So what's an example then of an illegitimate government? Well, a dictatorship would be an illegitimate government. Someone just takes control, people didn't vote him in place. In some cases, even a monarchy may be an illegitimate government because, in if you have a true monarchy where the king and queen have all the power, really the next in line is the one that has that is the king or the queen, next in line for the throne. So that's really not a legitimate government either because the people haven't elected the individual. A legitimate government simply also is if the vast majority of people obey the laws, then the government is legitimate. And so a monarchy may be legitimate or it may not be. In our case, if people don't obey the laws, what do? Well, we change the law. We have an election to change the law. Or if we don't like the president or the governor or the mayor, we vote them out of office the next time around. You can't do that with monarchy. Of course, you simply cannot do that with a dictatorship as well. Now, there are two major types of democracy. One is a parliamentary system. This system is very common in Europe. It is a system where really all the authority is in the elected national legislature. And in a parliamentary system, one of the biggest differences is they choose the elected executive. That is, they choose the chief executive. In this country, we choose our chief executive. We vote for our president. Now, we're not going to get into the whole debate about whether the system we have, the way it's set up, is it fair or unfair. That's for a different chapter. But in a parliamentary system, you elect people to a legislative body, and then that body elects the chief executive. So what does that mean? Well, if it was in our country, you would have a bit of a problem because in the House of Representatives being controlled by Republicans, you would have them, of course, probably vote for a Republican president. But in the Senate, which is controlled by the Democrats, they would probably vote then a Democratic government. Typically what happens in a parliamentary system is whoever the ruling party is, they then elect their own representatives. And typically that comes out of the House of Commons. In England, at least, other systems, other countries will do it differently. But that is the biggest difference is in how they choose a chief executive officer. We, of course, have a presidential system where power is divided between a separately elected president and a legislature. Courts may declare laws unconstitutional. You do not see that typically in a parliamentary system. Let me go back to that previous slide. This system is set up so that whoever the ruling party is, whatever decisions they make, pretty much are law. No one's going to challenge them a whole lot. No one's going to take them to court over an issue. They have full authority and full power. And so it's very different than a presidential system. If we go forward again, in a presidential system, a policy is tested every stage of the process. It can come out of the legislative branch, that is the Senate and the House of Representatives. It can go to the president. The president can veto it. They can send it back. It may get passed by the president, signed into law, and the Supreme Court can overrule it because they don't feel it's constitutional. So you really have a better system of checks and balances than you do in a parliamentary system. And again, this is a presidential system. This is the system we use here in this country. And you can see examples here of the chief executives of two different democracies. You have President Barack Obama on the left, and you have Prime Minister David Cameron of England on the right. President Obama was elected by the people. David Cameron was elected by the legislative body of England. So again, biggest difference is there. So, who governs? It depends on the issue, quite honestly. Our government is very pluralist. Political resources are widely available. It's very rare, and you will notice that, for a single group to dominate decisions. Every 6 years we elect new senators. Every 2 years we elect new House of Representatives members. Every 4 years we elect a new president. In each stage of the game you may have a different party in charge. And that doesn't mean that whoever's in charge at the federal level, whether it be Democrats or Republicans, you will see the same thing at the state level or even your county or local level. Political power is spread out over different types of governments, and that was intentional. State and local governments also play a huge role in politics. You'll see people rise up to the ranks, so to speak, to become state politicians after being local politicians. And after being state politicians, they may even go onto the national scene. So when you talk about who governs, it really is a pluralist society. It really is a pluralist government in terms of who has the power and who is in charge. And really, to what ends? What is the purpose? What is their purpose in ruling? Is it to determine how much you pay in taxes? Is it to determine whether abortion is legal or not? Is it to determine whether marijuana should be legalized or not? Really, every single party is going to have their own set of beliefs and ideals that they're going to try to get pushed through Congress and have the president sign into law. And you really see that when you have a divided executive branch from legislative branch. If you have a Republican president and a Democratic Senate in Congress, or I should say House, or vice versa. And a lot of times you'll see those in office may not always reflect the demographics of the electorate. It depends on what survey you believe or what poll you believe, but a lot of Americans would identify themselves as conservatives, yet we have a president in office who has been identified as liberal. You have, and so you also have people, and I'll use Arkansas as an example because that's where we live, your local Democratic office holders, those in the Democratic Party, typically on social issues are more conservative than the national counterparts. And so that really isn't a reflection on the electorate. I should say that is a reflection on the electorate, much more so than maybe the national party is. And so what does this mean for us? A lot of stalemate sometimes because you do have separation of powers. There is no one party in charge, no one person in charge. Stalemates really, over the past several years, have seemed to be the rule, not the exception. And you really only see people come together when you have a crisis of some kind, or public opinion is turning ugly. You'll see a lot of political bargaining in these cases. You know, like with the attack of 9/11, the bombing at the Boston Marathon last year. Really, political differences get pushed aside and people start to coming together. But that is that's not the norm. That's the exception nowadays. What it also means for us is federalism. The states are independent in a lot of cases of the national government, and laws are adjusted to meet the needs of the states. And you also will see, at least up to the past several years, states dominating things within their own borders, like education, how land is used, how law enforcement is used. Because remember, the Congress is there to represent the states. We elect people to Congress to represent us. It's not vice versa. People in Congress don't put people in power in the states. So federalism really is that separation of powers that our founding fathers really idealized. The Supreme Court also plays a huge role in looking at laws, whether they're unconstitutional or constitutional. They'll hear lawsuits from people challenging court rulings at the local level and at the regional level. And they're also, that's what protects our freedom of speech and freedom of assembly. The Supreme Court protects those rights for Americans. Now, to kind of wrap all this up, hopefully what you've got so far is that American politics are very adversarial. American politics and American government encourages participation. It stimulates disagreement and dissension. We are empowered to disagree. And that may not always be a good thing, but at least it allows us to speak our minds when we believe that our government is not doing what we think is best for ourselves and for our families. Chapter 1, again, is just a brief overview. Please review the chapter. If you have any questions about the chapter, please let me know. We will, in our next video, cover Chapter 2, which is the founding of our government. Have a great day, and I look forward to hearing from you soon.